Before we get started, let me tell you where I'm coming from. And after you hear this, you might just turn off the podcast. But I hope you don't. I am Gen X, Generation X. I didn't encounter history first as something bound between covers in a classroom. I watched it unfold live, in real time, often before anyone fully understood what we were watching. Televisions were always on when I was growing up. Cable news ran in the background of daily life. World events interrupted algebra class. CNN, Channel 1, and the network anchors narrated history as it happened. There was no pause button, no rewind button, no polished retrospective framing. Just images, repetition, and uncertainty delivered as events were still forming. At the same time, I was studying journalism in high school. Before radio, before production, before streaming, before voice work, I learned the fundamentals. The difference between fact and opinion, why attribution matters, why sources matter, why verification matters, why a free press is not decorative but structural to a functioning democracy. Those lessons stuck. I still listen to NPR. I still read the BBC. Not because I believe any institution is flawless. I understand incentives. I understand blind spots. I also recognize effort. I recognize when a newsroom attempts corrections, separates reporting from commentary, and slows a story down rather than turning it into a spectacle. I trust doctors. I trust scientists. I trust people who dedicate their lives to understanding systems that most of us don't have the time, training, or discipline to fully grasp. That does not require blind faith. It requires respect for expertise and for the slow accumulation of knowledge. Somewhere along the way, I learned the difference between skepticism and conspiracy thinking. Healthy skepticism asks questions and follows evidence wherever it leads. Conspiracy thinking decides the ending first and works backward. That distinction has helped shape how I've processed every major event in my lifetime. Watching history form. The first Gulf War looked like a video game from my high school bedroom watching CNN. Green night vision footage, bombs falling over Baghdad, anchors describing military maneuvers in language that sounded authoritative, even when the information was incomplete. The images were immediate. The context lagged behind. When you grow up consuming history like that, you start to rely less on sweeping narratives and more on patterns. You learn to notice what repeats, what escalates, what disappears from coverage once it becomes inconvenient. At the same time, I was working on my high school newspaper. I learned how to write a lead, how to verify a quote, how to distinguish between what happened and what someone said about what happened. I learned that framing is never neutral and that omission can distort as effectively as exaggeration. Watching global events unfold while simultaneously learning how stories are constructed leaves a mark. You can't fully surrender to spectacle once you understand how the machinery works. Culture cracked the bubble. I grew up a suburban white kid in Texas. I also listened to NWA, Public Enemy, Ice-T, and all of the hip-hop of that day. Those records were not abstract to me. They sounded like reporting. They described racial profiling, over-policing, and the experience of living under suspicion. That was not my lived experience, but it was clearly someone's. Then, Rodney King happened. We watched the footage. We watched the verdict. We watched Los Angeles burn. And we did so from classrooms and living rooms that felt far removed from the conditions that produced that anger. The contrast mattered. It became clear to me early that systems don't operate uniformly across populations, that resentment has roots, that many people move through life never encountering evidence that challenges their assumptions about fairness. For me, music cracked that insulation. Journalism provided the language for what I was observing. Waco and the rise of absolutism. Then came Waco. I remember watching it, standing in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, eating cereal, a heavily armed religious sect barricaded inside of a compound in Texas. Federal agents responded with a raid, then a siege, then armored vehicles and tear gas. The situation escalated on live TV over weeks. It ended in flames. We all sat there watching it in our high school journalism department on Channel 1. People died. Children died. Regardless of your view of the Branch Davidians, serious questions emerged about the conduct of law enforcement and whether escalation worsened the outcome. Those questions did not dissipate. Waco became symbolic fuel for a broader anti-government movement. Ruby Ridge was still fresh. Militias organized openly. Rage-fueled talk radio expanded its audience. Absolutist language replaced compromise. Then came the Oklahoma City bombing. Timothy McVeigh was not casually influenced by Waco. He was fixated on it. The federal building he targeted and the timing of the attack were deliberate. The bombing was framed in his mind as retaliation. Waco didn't simply conclude in tragedy. It became an accelerant. That pattern would repeat. Events interpreted through grievance don't stay contained. OJ and negotiated reality. Then came OJ Simpson. The white Ford Bronco crawling down the Los Angeles freeway, networks cutting away from scheduled programming, Domino's Pizza's biggest night of all time, the courtroom turning into a national stage. What stayed with me was not only the spectacle, but the outcome. Here was a man with wealth, fame, and elite legal representation facing substantial evidence. I mean, let's get real, just shy of actual video recordings of the killings. And he walked free. That was the first time I clearly understood that justice in America was not purely blind. It's procedural, it's strategic, and it's shaped by narrative. The defense didn't solely focus on physical evidence, but there sure was a lot of it. It reframed the trial around identity, policing, and historical grievance. Those grievances were legit. The LAPD's record on racial abuse was well documented. Rodney King was recent memory. Emotion didn't erase evidence, it reorganized it. Looking back, the trial feels like a rehearsal for a new area of media-driven identity politics. A wealthy public figure positioning himself as the victim of a corrupt system, a legal battle that doubled as a cultural referendum. I don't believe we arrive in the Trump era without first witnessing the OJ trial. Not because the men are identical, but because the trial demonstrated that narrative control can override factual weight in a polarized environment. That lesson lingered. 9/11 and the compression of complexity. Then came September 11th. Planes striking buildings, smoke, collapse, silence. The images repeated endlessly. Anchors spoke while struggling to process events in real time. There was no cohesive narrative yet, only shock. For those of us raised on live coverage, the pattern was familiar. Images arrive first. Interpretation follows slowly. In the weeks that followed, fear became the organizing principle. Complex geopolitical realities were reduced to slogans. Smoke 'em out. We can't let the terrorist win. Nuance became suspect. Questioning was framed as weakness. Fear does not encourage patience. It accelerates decision-making. It rewards certainty. It elevates confident voices when confidence exceeds evidence. Cable news amplified that dynamic. Repetition hardened assumptions. Once a narrative took hold, reversing it became nearly impossible. The lesson was clear. In moments of trauma, the public appetite for clarity outpaces the availability of truth. The war on terror and manufactured certainty. The war on terror emerged as an elastic framework capable of justifying prolonged intervention. Afghanistan stretched into a 20-year conflict with shifting objectives. Then, Iraq. Claims of weapons of mass destruction were presented with urgency and confidence. The media echoed official briefings. Skepticism struggled to gain traction. The weapons were never found. The intelligence was flawed and overstated. The invasion reshaped the region anyway. I remember watching the opening strikes of the Iraq War on my birthday in 2003. I sat in a bar in downtown Fort Worth with a friend of mine while watching history unfold on TV once again. The language felt familiar. Shock and awe. Precision. History framed as inevitability. What followed was prolonged instability. I watched it from the inside of a talk radio network. Institution dismantled without sustainable replacements. Sectarian violence filling the vacuum. Confidence did not guarantee competence. For a generation already aware of how narratives solidify quickly, this reinforced something uncomfortable. Authority can be wrong. they were wrong. And once fear is activated, skepticism can be sidelined. The collapse of gatekeepers. Over time, traditional gatekeepers, like we learned about in journalism class, had eroded. Reality TV blurred authenticity and performance. Social media scaled that confusion globally. Anyone could publish. Opinion presented as fact. Algorithms rewarded outrage, not accuracy. Expertise flattened into equivalence. This democratization of the media had benefits. Marginalized voices gained access to platforms. Barriers lowered. Information moved freely. It also removed friction from misinformation. Repetition created familiarity. Familiarity bred perceived credibility. Communities formed around shared belief rather than shared evidence. Conspiracy thinking flourishes in environments where certainty feels scarce and complexity feels overwhelming. Language as a weapon. Certain words began doing dishonest work. Socialism, quote unquote, transformed into a reflexive alarm rather than a policy discussion. Cold War residue lingered in public discourse. Distinctions collapsed. Woke, quote unquote, once shorthand for social awareness, became a caricature. Diversity initiatives were reframed as threats. Context was dismissed as agenda. Language simplified debate into tribal signals. When terminology erodes, accountability erodes with it. The through line. Gen X watched institution falter quietly while learning how stories were assembled. We don't require mythology. We require accuracy. Skepticism remains essential. Evidence has to anchor it. Once skepticism detaches from evidence, it becomes a tool for manipulation. Across decades, the pattern persists. Narrative outpacing verification, fear accelerating decision-making, identity overshadowing policy. This is not outrage. It's just observation. I watched it happen. And once you recognize the pattern, you can't return to innocence about how information, power, and fear interact. That recognition shapes how I evaluate the present. Not with nostalgia, not with panic, with context. This is Confessions of a Gen X Mind. This has been a witness statement, not a hot take. I'm George Tenike. If you like what you heard, check out all of our episodes on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you get podcasts. Also check out the essay companions to all of our episodes, confessionsofagenxmind.substack.com for a deeper dive. Thanks for listening. Chat with you soon.